And our next up is a superstar session about the key to success in the post-iOS 14 world. We've got Carole from Tenjin joining us. Carole, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I hear you very well, Dave.
Perfect. Well, look, thank you very much for joining us. I'm going to hand over to you for your presentation. If folks in the audience would like to ask any questions here about Tenjin and about the subject in hand, please drop them into the Q&A box. And what I'll do, Carole, is I'll come back in 20 minutes or so and help you to curate those. But in the meantime, I'll fade into the background and hand over to you.
Perfect. Thanks a lot. So let me share my screen very quickly and we can get started. Yes, hi everyone, I'm Carole and I'm here today to talk to you about the key to success in the post-iOS 14 user acquisition world, SKAdNetwork data reconciliation. I know it's a very long title, but I promise you it's going to be interesting in a different way than the Snapchat session you just watched. Just bear with me and the data lovers among you will love it. Yes. A little bit about myself. I'm a data scientist at heart, and I'm the general manager of the Berlin office of Tenjin. Some of you may have heard of Tenjin as a very affordable attribution for hypercasual. This is true, and we also offer other kind of services like putting all your marketing data in one place, your cost data, your ad revenue, in-app purchase, subscription, and we calculate for you LTV, ROI, ROAS. In addition to our product, like our dashboard, API, and database product, we also help our customer grow to the next level by providing them training that are custom-made for their size and their level of growth. And as mentioned, we are affordable, but even better than that, we are actually free when you are very small and don't send us a lot of events. And this was made specifically to accommodate indie developers. And as you grow, the pricing will grow with you. As part of this training that we provide, we realized that iOS 14 can be very confusing to a lot of you. So we made a few training specifically focusing on that. For example, conversion value modeling training, and we are now preparing iOS 15 training, something that I will also mention a bit later in the talk. With that being said, let's get started. This talk will be composed of 3 different parts. We'll start with what I call the basics, which is basically what happened in the last 6 months. I don't know, in case you are in a coma or in a very isolated place and you know nothing about iOS 14, I want to make sure everybody is on the same page. Then we'll go into the data and the facts. So what is the situation today? And I will finish with some practical advice if you too is trying to do data reconciliation between the old way of attributing and SKAdNetwork attribution. So let's go. Last year, Apple announced that they will completely disrupt the mobile ad industry and enforce a much stronger user privacy. They want to do that using this app tracking transparency policy that requires that every single app on iOS will have to ask for permission of a user to be tracked for any purpose that this tracking is serving. So this was announced last year, but only enforced end of April this year. And you should probably all have seen this pop-up, what we call the ATT pop-up, that effectively asks this permission, should say 1 sentence about why do you want to track the user, and then the user choose if they allow you to track or not. So since this announcement, we heard a lot about, oh, it's the death of IDFA, and IDFA is the Apple-created user ID that is used widely in the advertising industry. But actually, this policy touches a bit more than just the IDFA. It's any kind of identification of a user, anything that can make a company pinpoint who this user is and share this indicator with another company, and then the other company can also easily identify the user. So that could be any ID created by a third party. It can be you gathering enough information about the device that you can really clearly know who is this person behind the device, and it can be emails. All of these fall under this policy where you need to ask permission first before tracking. So since the announcement, app developer, publisher, all have been striving and testing a few different things about how to increase the ATT pop-up opt-in rate, meaning how can they suggest that their user accept to be tracked. And that's fair game. However, you need to be careful that you stay within Apple guideline, which means you can't say something like, if you don't accept to be tracked, your user experience will be terrible. This is a bit like blackmailing, and of course, Apple did not accept that. So with this loss of the user ID, how to do with the marketing? Like, marketing cannot work as usual. So Apple also announced their own attribution, what they call SKAdNetwork. And this is their way to solve this problem. Like, for all these users that will refuse to be tracked, Apple will provide attribution, and this will work without the company, the app developer, or third party to know who this exact user is. Already, all the biggest UA channel adopted this form of attribution and are partner of Apple. So this form of attribution would work with all your current UA channel. I also want to take a step back and explain for those of you that are not familiar with attribution in a very simple way what it is. So attribution is when you spend your marketing budget on several channels, for example, Facebook, Snapchat, Google, and you need an attributor to tell each install which channel should be credited for, and then it allows you to measure the performance of each of your channel and campaign. You choose a mobile measurement partner, MMP, and integrate their SDK in your app. And this way, the MMP SDK will track every single event, every single install at least, and send it to their server. And on their server, they will also track, let's say, click and impression from your UA channel, so that they can see which channel sent the last click before install, which is a very basic way to do attribution, and reward this channel or attribute the install to this channel. So in this slide, for example, we say Facebook win the install and is informed. So bear in mind, this is a simplification, but just to put everybody on the same page, this is how it worked before iOS 14.5. With Apple new attribution, SKAdNetwork, it will be slightly different. You can still work with the MMP, for example, Tenjin, and have their SDK. And their SDK will still know every single install. They will also catch any conversion value, which is a new indicator that Apple put in place, because with the new policy where you cannot see a very specific user, LTV and ROI cannot be calculated anymore. So instead, Apple provide this conversion value. So you can still define that a user that reach level 2 and play 10 games have a higher conversion value than a user that only reached level 1 and played 2 games. So the SDK of the MMP will still catch this info that will be sent from your app to the Apple server. And then Apple will take care of comparing clicks, impression, and decide who is the channel who wins the impression. Let's say here it's Facebook again. And then from this UA channel, they will share this information to your MMP. And here there's a little bit of a problem, as this is a new process. The industry is just starting to put things in place, and some channels were not ready in the past few weeks. Some decided to share it through API rather than real-time callback. Some share the real-time callback, but decided that they don't want to share certain information, like country or publisher source that I will also mention later. So here there's already a lot of work for your MMP to kind of receive and standardize and make sense of these different kind of data that they're receiving for you. So that's all the theory, like what we know and we're prepared to happen. Now, what has been happening since the enforcement of iOS 14.5? iOS 14.5, just to reiterate, is when this ATT pop-up was made mandatory and was launched in late April this year. And when we looked at our own data last week, all our iOS users, 68% of them were on one of these newer versions of iOS. So iOS 14.5 or 6 or later, but that's really few of them. So that means not yet all your users can fall under this new attribution and this new way of doing things. What was interesting is that it was launched end of April, and the adoption rate of the iOS user was fairly slow. And it's only around June, when their Apple pushed iOS 14.6, that we see an increase in the adoption rate until it reached 68%. And what we notice as well is that the advertiser on iOS kind of slow down their spend as the adoption increase, and that's kind of expected because people have to deal with new data set and new way to do their UA marketing strategy. So a lot of the advertisers decided to slow down their spend, observe how things are, see their operation can keep working the way it is, and some of them even decided to shift their budget to Android during this time. Another interesting number was of all these users who are on this newer OS of iOS, only 24% actually accepted to be tracked. So that's a minority of them, and think about it as only 2 users out of 10 can still be attributed the old way, and everybody else would not have an ID anymore and can only be attributed through SKAdNetwork. So knowing this information in the background, in the back of your head, how would you go about looking at your all attribution data and the SKAdNetwork attribution data, which as of today happen both in parallel? So I decided to take a very theoretical situation. Let's say you used to have 100 new install every day, and you're working with 9 UA channels and plus organic, of course. Then, and you have 10 new install on all of these channels. So that gives a very simplified picture of what a real situation could be. As of today, if you look at your all attribution data, and considering that probably you have probabilistic attribution enabled, which means we can keep doing the attribution using click and impression the same way we were doing it for limit at tracking user in the past. You will see that, okay, probably your attribution number are still pretty good for most of your channel, but some channel you won't have any install because the self-attributed network, like the big one like Facebook, Apple, Google, Snapchat, do not support click and impression. They have never supported this way, so we cannot use probabilistic attribution on this one, and their install will go into organic. That's not the only issue. The only issue is that also down the line, there's a lot of talk that probabilistic attribution may stop and may also be cracked down upon from Apple. There's a bit of debate on is this going to be tolerated or accepted for a long time. And if in a world where this was not possible, as of today, your data would look like this, where only the users that are accepted to be tracked, so to simplify, let's say 2 out of your 10 users per channel, will be attributed properly, and everything else will go to your organic. So that's not great. And let's look at how it would be for your SKAdNetwork attribution. First of all, you should know, and that's the first challenge, that SKAdNetwork do not inform of organic install. It's only for your paid install. And as of today, as I mentioned earlier, only 68% of the users are on this new OS and can be tracked through SKAdNetwork. So for each of your channel, you will only have this share of user that can be attributed. Of course, down the line in a few weeks or a few months, when all your iOS user will be on a newer version of iOS, then you will go back and in theory be able to get all of your install for each of your channel using SKAdNetwork. So let's say you accept the situation that not everybody yet is on iOS 14.5 or above, and want to do a reconciliation on the channel level, like just channel A. So you look at you expect 10 install, knowing that's what you usually get, but you saw that you only received 3 SKAdNetwork install. So the first reason why this can happen is there's a time difference. Like in the old way of attributing, we know exactly when the install happened, like the day and the time, then the minute and the second. While with attribution from Apple, they purposely added a timer that can be up to 24 to 48 hours after the user finished all their conversion value path, let's say in your app. So that you cannot pinpoint that SK postback you receive from Apple come from this one user you got in France on Monday. So they wanted to prevent that, still to protect user privacy. So for all your install on Monday, you'll need to look at SKANetwork from Tuesday, Wednesday to kind of find them without being able to know exactly which one will be the Monday's install. So that's a bummer, but let's say, okay, you move past this, you accept that that's a difficult problem to solve and you want to ignore it at first. You still think, yeah, receiving only 3 SKAdNetwork install for my Monday user, that still seems like lower considering this time discrepancy. And you might be right, depending on the channel you're running your campaign on, some of them don't have SKAdNetwork attribution enabled for all of their campaign. There's only a few campaign type where they enable it by default. And that's different channel to channel. So talk to your UA channel, you can double check that with them. But it's possible that you're running a few campaigns that don't have SKAdNetwork attribution enabled, and therefore you're not receiving the SKAdNetwork install for them. Then let's say you want to drill down lower than the channel level and look at, I don't know, publisher source or country. You might see even less SKAdNetwork installed than what you expect, particularly when you just start your campaign. Apple also have what they call the privacy threshold, where if you only got one install from a certain source or country, then they will not send you the SKANetwork postback yet. They will wait that there's a certain number of installs so that when they send them to you, you cannot easily pinpoint who exactly was the user that this postback correspond to. Also, certain channel, as I mentioned earlier, sends the SKAdNetwork install from Apple in a different way. Some don't include countries, some also don't want to include publisher source. So sometimes, depending on the channel, you might see that this granularity are missing. So that's a lot of challenge to overcome, but here is what would be my advice and some guideline of how you would still go about doing this reconciliation. First, how to solve the organic problem. Well, that could be quite simple, but you should always keep a tool or a place where you can monitor your overall new install, even if you don't know where the install is coming from, and know exactly every day how many new install you get. Then when you're confident that you are receiving all the SKANetwork install for your campaigns, you could always do this simple formula, total install versus SKANetwork install, and that should be your organic. Second advice, when you compare day by day, let's say your old attribution data to SKANetwork data, there might be a bigger discrepancy than if you take a week of data or a month of data, because in a week of data, that might be only the last 2 days of the weeks that you wouldn't have a complete, you wouldn't have received all the SKANetwork install. So the longer the time frame, the more you have days where you did receive the complete data set from SKANetwork. Advice number 3, talk to your UA channel and ask them like how many campaigns do you have that don't have SKANetwork enabled. Of course, the data scientist in me would tell you just enable all of them, stop the campaign that don't have SKANetwork. But I can hear some of the UA manager here saying, well, but this kind of campaign maybe don't perform as well, or the CPI is much higher. I don't want to do that. And that's also fair. However, I would advise you to plan ahead and that at some point you pull the plug on this kind of campaign and just accept the new way of attribution and try to have all your campaign with SKANetwork attribution enabled. But when can be a good way to do that? That's my advice number 4. Keep monitoring your iOS user base and which OS version they're using. Like for us, it was 68%. For you, it might be more, it might be less. But when you see that like almost 100% or 100% of your iOS user now use a newer version of iOS 14, maybe now then it could be a good time for you to be more bullish and only adopt SKANetwork campaign and really get more familiar with SKANetwork data. Bonus advice, wait for iOS 15. So a few weeks ago, Apple made a pretty exciting announcement that in iOS 15, things will be done a little bit differently. So remember how I explained attribution earlier on the Apple SKANetwork? Well, they added this pathway where your MMP or yourself as an advertiser don't need to rely on the channel to bring back the SK install to you. Apple can also send that directly to you. So that solves the problem of, for example, not having certain of the SAN install or having some data being hidden like publisher source or country. Now all the data you will receive will be the same. There's other problems that will arise, but I will be talking about this in the next slide because, of course, I would be damned if I don't advise you to use Tenjin. One of the problems that will remain with iOS 15 is that the SKANetwork postback only include the campaign ID of SKANetwork, what they call SKANetwork campaign ID, which is not something you can easily map to your UA dashboard campaign. Like you cannot easily know which AppLovin campaign or Facebook campaign it's matching to. This is still a black box. But with Tenjin, we will solve this solution and map this for you. We are also building a solution called attribution modeling, very different from probabilistic attribution, where using SKAdNetwork information, we will bring back information like ROI and LTV on the user level so that you can have all the granularity you're used to as of today. This solution will be delivered in 3 phases. We already finished phase 1. We are now in phase 2. So that if you are a Tenjin user, very soon you'll see in your dashboard this new calculated ROI and LTV using SKAdNetwork. And the last phase will be for our most advanced user to also have the data behind the hood of, for each single user, what probability did we calculate that they came from this campaign or this other campaign. So a quick recap. You can take a screenshot of this slide if you are interested. Today, very hard to do the data reconciliation. You're trying to compare bananas with oranges, let's say. But I hope with this advice, you will still try it and stay on top of your data set so that you are prepared when the data become cleaner and cleaner to monitor your operation using SKANetwork data. You know how to calculate organic, take a longer time frame than what you're used to if you usually compare cohort day to day, just take weekly cohort. Talk to your UA channel, make sure at some point all of your campaign have SKANetwork-enabled and monitor your iOS user base. Be patient, but be prepared. Also, if you have any question, if you have been trying to do this data reconciliation yourself, we want to hear from you. This is the email where you can ask any question about Tenjin. And for me, you can just replace support by Carole@tenjin.com, and I will be happy to hear from you. Thank you.
Fantastic. Carole, thank you very much. A round of applause on behalf of all the audience there. I know that at some point soon we'll be able to do this all in person, but until then you'll have to imagine the applause coming from everyone. Really interesting presentation there about a hot topic that we know we covered many times on the pocketgamer.biz website, and that people has been one of the hot topics of this year, right? The change in the way that ads work on Apple devices. So that was a really great and really granular information there. You explained a whole bunch of stuff there that was that kind of demystified some of those processes for me, and I'm sure for others. So we've got a few questions there from people. I'm going to just take a few minutes. We've got some minutes before the panel join us, so I'm going to grab these questions. Thank you very much to our attendees who have dropped these in here, and I'll put them to you if that's all right, Carole. So the first person says here, on behalf of indie developers, they ask, how many adjustments and what impact will it have on monetization? And what does the Tenjin solution absorb part of this impact? So this questioner also apologizes if they missed this. I know you went into a lot of detail, but I guess they're asking, as an indie developer, what impact what impact does Tenjin help solve, basically?
Yes, that's a very good question and a very general concern, like the monetization side of the impact of iOS 14. For us in Tenjin, we are not the one helping you get ads or pushing your ads. So what we bring is visibility, like you can monitor what's going on and if effectively your ad monetization is dropping, and you can drill down into lower levels so you can maybe pinpoint, is it only dropping on a country level or for certain ad placements? This is where we would help. And particularly also for hypercasual, what is important is, does your monetization is still generating enough revenue to cover your CPI? Like this is the whole business model of hypercasual using ads. So this is something where you want to be monitoring and be confident that you have the right information to make sure you still have enough ROI.
Got it. Thank you. This next question, really, I think the person is asking for your opinion on this. Apple, of course, made these changes to iOS, the removal of the IDFA and so on. And it comes as part of Apple's drive for privacy, I guess. So the question has asked here, though, is the iOS stance really about privacy, or do you think it's more about Apple having control over the data?
Okay, so this would be very much my personal opinion. I think there's a bit of both, maybe 99% about user privacy. I mean, this is also a good selling point for Apple to sell more iPhone and computer if they can promise that your data is more secure. And we know that the Apple consumer love that. That's a big selling point of their marketing. And for the other one, I heard a lot of like complot theory that, oh yes, they're going to gather all this data and have all this user data and use it for themselves. Who knows? I'm not really sure. I mean, these companies are under scrutiny in the US. that's not entirely in their interest to do that.
Okay, that's interesting. That's good. Thank you for your opinion on that. Again, another good question here. Forgive me if it's detailed, so forgive me if I read it out. So, as you mentioned, there are a lot of challenges and trade-offs with the time-based conversion tracking model in the SKAdNetwork, and determining what to actually measure is not so easy anymore. What will be the long-term impact of that for smaller developers? Is it just a case of having an adjustment phase?
Definitely, there's some adjustment phase that people reduce what they're tracking. Like in the past, they have a lot of custom events and track after the install, maybe forever, like what the user is doing. Right now with Apple, they are limited to track only what happened after the first 24 hours, just because they want to have the information of which channel want the install fast. So this already we saw most of the Hypercasual Studio do, reduce and only track in the first 24 hours after the install. And then I think for indies, they will learn and they will be educated more and more into what kind of product analytics events are important and can help predict the valuable user. And I think what will happen for them is that more tools, because we know the indies don't necessarily have a resource to hire data scientist team and gather a lot of data themselves. So I think a lot of tools will go into the space to fill this gap and try to sell to indie developer, knowing that all these bigger studios started as indies and betting on it.
No, that's great. Thank you. Actually, just on the point that you made a moment ago, I'm going to skip to this question here. Someone's asked, what changes in KPIs would you advise developers to do to get the most out of the SKAdNetwork?
KPI, well, definitely conversion value. That was a KPI that didn't exist at all before and that everybody had to get used to. So if you are getting used to and you set them up properly, you might be on top of the game in terms of being able to optimize your campaign, and that can help you a few slots in the App Store. And then later on, learn to translate this conversion value into predicted LTV.
Great, thank you. Someone here has asked, will sparse signals overly favor advertisers with the most budgets? And is there a workaround to that?
With the most budget, I guess these people will always have a bit of advantage. But still, if you just bid in the dark, at some point you lower your margin. So I don't think on the long term these people would be advantaged. Really, the people who would be the most advantaged are the ones that understand the SKANetwork data and can use it for their operation and optimize their campaign properly.
Okay. Oh, here's a question. How should we act to protect ourselves from fake data on the new iOS system if we know that post-install conversion data can be faked?
Yes, so I'm not the best person to answer this question. That's not my expertise, but Apple will have a system where you can't send this SK postback you receive from them, or you think you receive from them, but you suspect that it might be fake, for them to verify it. And of course, your MMP can also do that for you.
Okay, and just while we wait for the next panel to come along, I've got a few more questions. If you're happy to answer them, I'll bring them to you. So how are local changes in legislation, for instance, the COPPA in the US, the age-appropriate design code in the UK, which is similar, how do they impact the way that developers and publishers can gather and use data?
Yeah, that was maybe the first wave with GDPR of app developers becoming more and more conscious of what they collect as data. I think like Apple policy now is broad enough that there's a big overlap with most of these local policies. You just need to stay on top and see if any of these local policies suddenly is more aggressive and you need to hide even more. But really, I don't see what more you would need to hide than what Apple already recommends.
Right.
Looking for.
That's good. Let's just take one more here while we go. How would you advise us to deal with the issues in the SKAdNetwork, specifically the distributed postback data and limited granularity?
Yes, that's many things, but basically try to collect as much data as you have and start today to do this exercise of trying to reconcile it. And of course, as I mentioned today, it's going to be very hard because there's so many differences in both data sets, but by just monitoring it, you should over time see that there's an improvement and the data quality get better. and do that at different granularity. Like, don't start at a very low granularity because you'll get desperate and want to give up immediately. Start on the channel level, like I recommended, and just also keep an eye on the country and publisher source level. But at some point in a few weeks, you should see the channel level data already looking really good, and then have hope that the more granular data will get better. And with iOS 15, even more, all of this granularity should be covered.
That's perfect. Thank you. Well, we'll leave it there. Thank you to everyone for all their questions. That's great. And Carole, thank you for taking the time to answer them. Brilliant there. If people want to follow up, I guess they can, again, you put some details on the screen there, but they can find you on the Discord or the Meet to Match, yes, and so on. So Carole White-High, thank you very much. Round of applause from all the audience. That was great. Really, really insightful and deep dive into that hot topic. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, Pocket Gamer.